pull back to a side here or to a side there. I'm asking you, when observing the individual, to observe the actual pure objective situations you find, and at the same time get a sense, subjective experiences. What is this body striving to do in its posture? And the more you see people repeatedly with certain postural findings, you find that every posture is the body striving towards a particular goal. It's striving towards a certain type of defense pattern. And the idea is to understand what that is, and that happens with repetition and seeing the patterns consistently over and over again. What is the body striving to do right now? And then how does that shift? Another thing we'd like to look at is, where is the respiration happening? In the back, in the front? What zones seem to be breathing? Take a breath in your nose and out your mouth. And as he breathes, if you look, breath in again, there's an expansion in the upper ribs, and there's a rocking of the spine slightly back. It could be something so simple in taking care of someone as that they're not breathing. You see them in a frozen pattern rather than a dynamic pattern. You might want to ask the person to breathe gently in the nose, out the mouth, and even a little bit more profoundly, and take a look. That may actually shift the postural findings. Take a breath more deeply and bring it into your belly. And as he's doing this, we're seeing more of a dynamic change in the system. If you want to see where the system is at, and you want to take a snapshot of it at that point, you might want to say, freeze, don't breathe. But that's not what life is about. We're looking for dynamic changes. It's also important to see, to what effect does breath make a difference on the structure? And this is important because when the person is face down, you may want the person to breathe more. And taking care of a person, you may find this particular individual has a certain pattern when they're not breathing very much. So what might you do? Have them breathe while you're taking care of them. Why? Because you want to take care of the person when they're in their most resourceful state, not the least resourceful state. The idea is to build resourcefulness. We're now going to assess prone visual observation. It's imperative that when we take care of someone, at some point in the first visit, we have the entire spine exposed, so we can look and visually feel and see what's happening. There may be areas of the spine where there may be scarring. There may be areas that's bruised. It's important to know this. Also, coloration can change different areas of the spine. In early chiropractic history, there was an instrument called visual nerve tracer, and actually what it actually looked at is change in coloration along the spine, indicating change in sympathetic flow. Later on, thermography became utilized. Visually, you can take a look at any damage or lesions, injuries. You can take a look at, see if the areas look like a swollen. Other areas, discoloration. And why? That's your starting point. It may also enter into dialogue, further dialogue with the person about their history. In addition to that, you have a baseline as you're working with people to see if there's a change, especially in areas of coloration, which are associated with, again, the vasoconstriction, vasodilatation, and a sympathetic response. Now, when observing here, I'm going to be observing for tension patterns, holding patterns, asymmetries. The idea here is to track the basic neuroskeleton holding points and distortion patterns. And the 5 spinal cord tension patterns we're referring to are the phases, and each one has a different type of mechanical holding, so to speak, of the spinal structures, the nerves, the muscles, the connective tissue. So this gives us lots of information. So in first examining, I'm going to stand back and just observe. What does that mean? I'm going to, as an artist, just allow the information to be assembled without having to interpret what it means. This allows me to have a broad perspective, right and left brain perspective, and get general impressions that do not have to fit into any box right now, but may show up in the assessment later on as a, quote, intuitive area. It's not really intuitive per se. We think it is. It's that we tracked patterns out and the unconscious competency. And you must trust those unconscious competency patterns do give you information. Over time, we need to understand why we came up with that decision and what that pattern is associated with. Please allow yourself to have that impression. What impression do I have? And write on the notes, impression. And you may make a note, question mark, you don't know why, but what the consequence of that was. Later on, if you have an impression, it's important to understand how you came to that conclusion. I'm seeing an area in this particular area that is rather tense. There's a serious amount of tension there. There's a compression as if the area is being compressed to the midline and compressed in this area, in this particular zone. I am seeing the indentation more in here where that cervical lordotic curve is, and I do not see the same stress factor here in the upper thoracic spine as I saw standing or seated. However, look down here. If I actually extend his neck forward, I can see that this is actually bulging. If his neck is more an extension, the atlas rides under the skull, there's less of extension, then more extension here. What happens is the slack is taken out and this upper thoracic area shifts. So that's important in visual observation to observe it. You may take so and observe it in a neutral position. You may put slight extension, slight flexion. And basically, because someone's lying on a table any one particular time, that doesn't mean that's what the spine is like. It means that's what it's like at that posture. So for some people, you may need to shift the person into the posture which actually creates the most ease or the most resourcefulness, because that'll be the posture which they could receive the care most effectively with. However, there must still be a free communication from the top to the bottom of energy and breath. When looking further at the spine here and looking here, there's not as much of a lumbar curve as I saw in other postures. Put your neck into extension. And actually, as neck into extension, it flattens out more here. Put your neck into flexion. And in flexion, you get more of an extension. That's letting me know here, even observing it, that the mechanical tension in the spine associated with the neck, with the folding and unfolding of the spinal cord and the dura, is having an impact on the lumbar curve here. That's going to be important in my analysis, and I actually saw that just by changing the position and visually observing what was happening. When visually observing, I am also looking for global tension patterns of the tissues. Visually here, and this may not be so easy to see, or it may be, I suggest you start looking for it, because many things which become very obvious to you are obvious because you get used to looking at it. With greater observation, with greater becoming aware of it, and looking at that finding, you will find greater discernment, and next time you'll be able to look at it with different eyes. There's a tension pattern also in the rib cage here. Visually, you can see it. How much of this is the pure visual perception, and how much it is my having a kinesthetic experience of him, interpretive visual, I am not separating, nor do I choose to separate it, because the reality is, in a dynamic living assessment of someone, in an open system, we want to include the subjective interaction between practitioner and client, because that is what we're looking for. You're taking care of them that way, and at the same time have as many, quote, objective assessment tools as you can. When looking down, I'm looking to see from the neck all the way down, how does it appear that tension is actually being directed down the body? Does it appear as if there's a tension pulling the legs all the way up like this? Does it appear that there's a tension from the knee and bring the leg like this, or in this position? Where is the high areas of tension, both palpation, visually, and your experience of it? And I'm asking you to do this, and I know there's been a big movement in the cultures to separate the practitioner's involvement for an objective assessment. I have a challenge with that in an interactive system. And I believe it's important to work with the dynamics of the two of you together at the same time, have specific objective indicators. So when looking from a distance here, I'm looking at the entire spine, and what I'm finding is my eye keeps stopping over here. When I'm looking down the whole line, that this particular area somehow appears to be an obstruction between the top and the bottom. Something, this tension pattern is here. When we go to palpate, we're going to find out why might I have gotten those impressions. What may happen, the palpation is the next step in giving further discernment to what we have visually seen, and then help us assess what phase is present, what level of care is present, and how we may want to intervene. With every posture a person's in, we're going to look for where is the breath. Breathe in your nose and out your mouth. And we're going to watch with breath. Where does the breath move to? And this is going to be interesting here. As we look here, breath in and out. The breath is rolling along the spine, going to the sacrum here. Breathe in your nose, out your mouth. It's getting to the upper sacrum. With that, there's a little bit of a breath rocking going into the lower part of the sacrum. Breathe in your nose, out your mouth, a little more profoundly. In this area, there's more of a struggle for the breath, the spine moving. The breath is happening, but I'm not seeing the spine rocking as much. There is more motion in the cervical spine. This is telling me that, again, this area is the area of defense. And when the area is in defense, movement is restricted, including the accessory muscles of respiration. So this already is telling me this area may be like quicksand. What that means, information goes in, nothing comes out. There's an area where the information between the brain and the body is scrambled. Does that mean there's an area that has to be addressed or adjusted? No. What this means is this is an area which is adaptive, and we need to be able to improve its adaptability from wherever we need to address.